Okay, let's start. Hi everyone. I am Laura Iosifescu, the founder of the multi-award winning Laura IR Gallery, and I will be your host tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I am a professional artist myself, an activist, mentor, upcoming author, and an art consultant. I am also the living proof that dreams can and do come true when you believe in something with all your being, regardless of your circumstances. I've passed from being a lost immigrant with no identity, no English language, and living on the streets of London to becoming one of the top most inspirational women in London, voted by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. This evening, we are celebrating an amazing person, an artist who we believe is a true role model for those who give up on dreaming. Ted Harrison is here today to show us how faith in art has motivated him to pursue his lifelong dream of becoming an artist. You will hear all about why and what inspired Ted to give up on 40 years in broadcasting as a BBC correspondent, Radio 4 presenter, and television producer to become an artist at the age of 60 when most people would have retirement in view. Ted has called the exhibition Working on the Edge, as he works literally on the geographic edge of the United Kingdom, Unst, the most northern island of Shetland, and Ceredigion, if I'm pronouncing it well, of the west coast of Wales. And these are two cultural places who have far removed from the center of Britain. In Wales, language and culture is dominant, and in Shetland, the forces of nature and the Viking past shape the way of life. Ted worked for 40 years as a writer and broadcaster and television documentary maker, specializing in reporting on religion in the modern world, including time as a BBC religious affairs correspondent. He also has a PhD in theology. At the age of 60, he made a career switch, became an art student at the University for Creative Arts, and graduated with an MA in Fine Art. The course was very much focused on contemporary art practice, but Ted found the theory too secular, indeed militantly, so that his thinking was on the edge of today fashionable academic ideas. Since then, Ted has been working as an artist, exploring what he calls visual theology, dividing his time between Shetland and Wales through exhibiting and creating public artworks around the UK. In Ted's words, art is religion without words. We agree with Ted when he said that art is a new kind of religion. Without art, we don't have an overall thing in common as a mass, and it can be used as something that connects entire groups, just as religion did and still does. Art is therefore very important. Although there are many critics when it comes to art, and especially when it comes to the meaning of it, I think the most important thing nowadays is to connect people again with that one thing that they have in common. Contemporary art becomes likely even more interactive, which doesn't only connect a bigger group, but also connects the viewer with the artwork. We live in a secular era in which we get more distant from each other. There isn't that one magical thing that connects random people or that has a group of believers behind it. Art doesn't really have something, or doesn't have to be something you believe in, but think of it as something you sense and what calms your longing for something. Art doesn't have to be true either. Art can be an escape from daily life. Art connects, inspires, and it's always there. Art is religion. Now, before I introduce you to the star of the night, Ted Harrison, I would like to share with you an exclusive interview between Ted Harrison and TV celebrity Reverend Richard Coase, where they share ideas about this topic. Ted and Richard collaborated a few years ago in 2 volumes of stories of improbable sense. Richard writing the text and Ted the illustration. And now, once again, they've joined their talent to create this inspirational interview. Now, if you give me a bit of a few seconds, then I can share my screen with you so you can watch this amazing clip. Award-winning Laura I Art Gallery. Hi everyone, I am Laura Iosifescu, the founder of the multi-award-winning Laura I Art Gallery, and I'm very proud to host an exclusive interview between the amazing Ted Harrison, who is one of our gallery artists we represent, and the very well-known Reverend Richard Coase, who is a Church of England parish priest and the co-presents BBC Radio's 4 Saturdays Live. He presented 2 series of BBC One, the Big Painting Challenge, and is a regular contributor to television and radio. I'm so excited about having you both here. Thank you so much. Lovely. And what I would actually like to start off with is asking you, Ted, if you would like to take the lead and tell our audiences a little about your exhibition and about this fantastic interview. You have titled our private view Religion Without Words, Art Religion Without Words. Would you please tell us a bit more about the vision behind it?
It really goes back to when I decided at a sort of veritable old age of 60 that I was going to become an artist full time. I'd been in broadcasting and writing up until then. And I thought, there's something that I'm not happy about with the way in which I'm dealing with religious ideas and spiritual ideas and reporting them on reporting on them in the world today. It's the language. It's the language which is decisive. It's the language which people of faith seem to think that because they got their handle on it, they therefore got the truth entirely. And I began to think, well, maybe the language we can go beyond. Maybe the visual arts is the way for me to go. No, I could have gone into music, but I am not able to play any musical instrument, unlike Richard, of course. And I have been drawing and sketching. In fact, in the past, I've worked a parallel career as a cartoonist. So I've got the skills, if you like, or the experience. So I thought I'd look at contemporary art. And contemporary art, I found, was a way of being able to explore visual ideas with a total freedom of medium, of expression, of concept, until, of course, I was disillusioned, became an art student, and discovered that current art theory is militantly secular. And if I was going to try and use art to explore theology, I would have to plough my own furrow. Is that something you, Richard, have noticed about contemporary art theory? This secularity of it?
Well, not just contemporary art, but sort of almost contemporary everything. There is it's a secularism which is so dominant. I think it's now become almost invisible to its adherents. So, and that's a companion piece to the general sort of failure of engagement with a religious tradition, or any religious tradition, not just the one that we inherit as being British people here and now. And so very often you feel that that's a huge challenge. You can no longer make assumptions about any sort of shared language or any shared experience around that. But it's also a big opportunity, it seems to me, because you can start to rebuild the relationship with audiences. And I'm interested when I hear about your frustrations as someone who's done so much in religious broadcasting. You're a great explainer of things, but you can, talking about God necessarily constrains God, diminishes God and the things of God. And I'm just very interested why it was 60, that magical age. I just happened to be 59, of which you discovered a desire to start going about that business in a completely different way.
I think it was partly because at the age of 16, I was working in broadcasting and was finding that all the commissioning editors appeared to me to be 14 and a half. And so it was my age on my side. Also, of course, you get to an acceleration in life as you get near the end. It's a bit like, falling off the cliff. You get faster and faster the nearer you are to hitting the bottom. And you really want to get on with things. And you want to try and work out, well, what is it all about? All these questions that I've been trying to explain to people through words. And I still can't get my handle, can't get it really in my own head. Let alone explain it to anybody else. And I find, as a regular churchgoer, at least up until COVID, because they didn't want us in the buildings then, I would be saying the creed, for instance, and I would think to myself, I don't believe a word of this, and yet I know essentially it's all true.
Yeah.
And so it's something to do with that experience of God without actually putting God into some form of dogmatic box that I wanted to get away from.
And I can understand the appeal of contemporary art, highly theoretical sphere that it might be, but the story of contemporary art is very largely a story of revolution, I think, and the abandonment of conventions. If you were looking for a means to transcend the constraints of form, then maybe contemporary art offers you a very rich palette, if I may say so.
It does, and that's what I've really enjoyed about it. But at the same time, found it's not this golden utopia of creativity that perhaps they make it out to be, because you get up against certain ideas and there's a rigid block. You cannot do this. For instance, my MA final piece, I decided that I was going to do a version of the Stations of the Cross. Now, I don't know whether the art college had ever had anybody wanting to do anything like this. And I chose a medieval church to do this work in and all the rest of it. But I had a lot of discussion and debate with the course leader about this, not so much focusing on the ideas. There would be full of ideas if the person producing a work of art wanted to talk about gender or identity or something like that. But there was just no communication between us when it came to talking about theological ideas. So I put this up, but then I had decided then that I was going to explore it in my own way. And of course, at the same time, discovered within many of the churches, there was also a resistance to contemporary art. The Protestant tradition in particular being one of the word, and the emphasis on the word and on scripture, that which is written, was another constraint. I love to look back at old churches where they would have painted the ceiling and had glorious colours, and stained glass is a lovely medium. I haven't tried it myself, but it would be a lovely medium to try, where you're actually sucking in some of the glory, if you like, of the divine outside and filtering it through for human consumption through the glass without being restrained by the words.
There are restraints, of course, aren't there? I mean, restraints, as you say, sort of theoretical restraints, particularly now, where you can't do so much as sneeze without that being tested in various kind of orthodoxies. I'm not going about that. But I'm thinking also, even in the sort of periods of the greatest flowering of the visual arts in the service of the gospel, the Renaissance, for example, the High Middle Ages, there were constraints of a different kind, weren't there, to do with patronage, I suppose, and to do with there is no version of Christianity that is not someone's version of Christianity. It's owned by someone, and they have their own preoccupations and concerns. That's a bit different now, isn't it? I think that sense about that you are speaking a language which very few understand, while that could be frustrating, again, that might also be liberating. You've got nobody telling you, tutting, leaning over your shoulder and saying, "Oh, I don't think you've quite understood the nature of the hypostatic union, Mr. Harrison." And
there's no way in which you can explore it using paint either, which is probably a very good thing. You know, there are lots of ways in which dogma has restricted the way in which you can think. And some of the metaphors too, which are now sacred, have their restrictions. That's another thing I remember getting excited about or dissatisfied with. The Good Shepherd, God as the Shepherd, a metaphor that comes through in the Gospels very strongly, but is there in Psalm 23 and so on. And then you stop to think, there is an end to this, because what does the shepherd keep his sheep for? It's ultimately to sell them and eat them. You've got to recognize the limitations of all metaphor. And I think within the visual arts, what it does is that there are no limitations, because the limitations are only set by whoever it is looking at it. And if that which is getting to them or into them from that which is divine, and I hesitate to define that, through the art in any small way, is achieved, then there's no way in which they then can stop and think, well, is this consistent with that, or is that, where does that line of argument lead to? You can stand in front of a painting and glory in it without having to worry.
Johann Sebastian Bach famously wrote on all his manuscripts, "To the greater glory of God," offered his art in the service of God. And also it seems to me that as a form of prayer, and I wonder if for you, is painting prayerful?
Yes, it is. It is a form of prayer. And to quote from the visual arts, of course, Picasso said that all art is a lie that leads you to the truth. And that, I think, is what all forms of art without words do, whereas art with words has in some way to constrain the truth. And you're allowed through art to be able to discover things which can't be put in the box labeled heretic. You have a certain freedom to go your own way, to explore the infinity and eternity that we put in the box as God.
Is there also a priestliness to the artist's role? I'm thinking of one of my favourite artists, not just an art poetry, but David Jones, who I'm sure is someone you would admire, not only because of the quality of his work, but also because, like you, he finds Wells a particularly resonant place. But it does seem to me that there is something of, certainly the preacher, more than that, the priest, someone who stands on the Godward side of man and the manward side of God.
There's certainly something I would think of the meditative hermit in the artist. Now I'm thinking here of someone like Georges Rouault, who in his lifetime kept himself very much to himself, produced these amazing works. One of the works, in fact, that I've done is based on a Rouault crucifixion. But naughtily, I have then actually made it as a collage using the pages of Richard Dawkins' book, which is a fun thing to do. But yes, I think you are right. There is a form of priesthood of the artist. Or more perhaps, I would use, the two roles are shaman, because they use the trickery of the material world to lead you on to something greater, and prophet, because the artist has to speak the truth and it's not restrained by any institutions from doing so.
Elvis as an avatar of such things. Perhaps you'd like to talk about that.
I've done an Elvis painting, actually, which is a comment on celebrity and how celebrity eventually fades away, even in the name of the greatest Elvis. And I used sand rather than paint. It's like an hourglass trickling through. So the portrait of Elvis trickles away, and eventually, when his time is up, he will be gone. But there is, of course, the side of Elvis where people have turned him into some form of messianic figure. And that's a fascinating exploration because, as it's been said, if in an era where there is no idea of God, then people invent gods for themselves. And Elvis is certainly an example of that, with all the pilgrimage to Graceland and the relics of Elvis and people praying to Elvis. So people can turn to almost anything. If you believe in nothing, then you can believe in anything.
Another creature that flits across your work, as it does across the work of many late artists, I'm thinking of Braque in particular, is the bird. And I think it's interesting that you choose to live in places, Shetland, off the coast of North Wales, where bird life is particularly fascinating. What is it about birds?
Well, the poet and priest R.S. Thomas said that God was in the throat of the bird. It's the sound of the bird, it's the sound, it's just the freedom. I spent a lovely several minutes yesterday just watching a thrush, with its anvil and its snail, bang, bang, bang. I was just absolutely absorbed by watching this little thrush. Because, if you can see God in the grain of sand, if you can see God in the smallest creature, as well as standing on the mountaintop, looking at the boiling sea below you in Shetland, or the glorious horizons as you would in Wales. It's the two ends, isn't it? God, the great God, the small, and everything in between.
Also, not just spiritual dimensions, but material dimensions too, in that birds fly between the heavens and the earth.
That's an analogy I hadn't thought of, but I would agree with you. And one picture I did of the Arctic tern actually celebrates the bird that migrates further than any other bird. It goes from Shetland down to the very southern latitudes in a year and back again. It's a delicate little swallow-like bird. And I remember sitting one day in a boat with a friend just offshore in Unst, and there was a whole gaggle of these terns diving for little fish in the sea. And it's an extraordinary sight, which I celebrated in one of the pictures. But yes, this idea that you encompass the world as well if you're a bird.
They're not so delicate when they dive from your head, as I discovered when I walked through one of their nesting grounds on the island of Grimsey, off the coast of Iceland. It didn't feel very dainty then at all, but maybe that's a reminder too that God can be both delicate and also assertive in the divine interaction.
Well, come and see the bonxes on Unst, the great Arctic skewers, then you'll know what it's like to be dived from.
Place is very important, obviously, Ted. You take care to live in places which I think are threshold places for you, for your imagination.
On the edge, yes.
On the edge. Beaches, sacred places, those are the themes which preoccupy and are in your pictures.
Yes, there's a favourite spot in the entire world, which is Score Beach in Unst, which I go to from time to time, almost as a pilgrimage. It's the most northern beach in the country, and just seeing it in all its moods, or what might be offshore. I've seen a huge basking shark there on one occasion. I've seen a whole variety of seabirds, and on one occasion I found this delicate little washed up torso of a doll just in the beach, and that set me thinking again. The beach is a threshold. Where did this doll come from? Was it once loved? How did it get here? It just sets you thinking, and then you look at the beach and you look at the cliffs, and there's an old Viking house that is crumbling away on the side of one cliff. You see the strata going back to a time millions and millions of years ago, when the Earth's crust of America and the Earth's crust of Europe actually banged together, where Unst is today. You just get that timelessness, and you get that feeling of time, that it's not a continuum. You haven't just got now and eternity. You've got time as it's measured by the rolling of the sea. You've got time as it's measured by the up and down of the tide. You've got time as it's measured by the winter and sun. And then you've got time as it's measured by geology. It's just a lovely place to remind oneself of the just the fragility of time.
There's also something about tectonic interaction that's very interesting, because I think also you have that sensitivity for places where you might say there's a gap between surfaces, and through that gap we glimpse what lies beyond or what lies beneath. Thin places, unstable places where all of a sudden our intimations are confirmed.
And I think creating art, you find your own thin places, and you hope that you're the membrane, and something from one side comes through the canvas, reflects from it, and somebody somewhere will see it.
You sound like an icon writer. I remember talking to an icon writer in Romania, in Iași, there, who said, I was fascinated, I still am fascinated by icon writing. And he said, of course, it's not a surface, it's a window. It's something you see through. Maybe that's the function of religious art, is to be a window you see through.
That's true.
It's a window that everybody can share.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was a lovely ramble through ideas. I think that
Pleasure.
What a fantastic conversation. Oh gosh, I could listen to you both for hours and hours. It's unbelievable. You both are so inspirational. And I'm sure our audiences are going to enjoy so much this exclusive interview.
I would say something, if I might just say something about, I'm really delighted to be able to have this conversation with Ted. We've worked together extraordinarily and fruitfully in the past, but also I think Ted's vision is one which is inclusive and open, draws you in, and again opens up a way through that. It's a path that is so often clogged or choked by the weeds of doctrine, dogma, proposition, language, vocabulary, tradition, creed. And all those things are important. I don't pretend that we can just uninvent them and discover boundless freedom. But I think it's that way of going in obliquely to these profound subjects, profound themes. And for that, I'm really grateful. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Wow, beautiful.
That was fantastic. Hey, right. I think you can agree with me. It was an amazing interview between Ted and Richard. Right. So, if for some reason you experience a technical difficulty and you couldn't watch the interview, no worries. After the event, we will share the link. Yeah. So don't worry about that. Right, so before I introduce our star of the night, I would like to remind you that our online store is now up and running. We have over 400 artworks in our collection, and we represent right now 25 artists from around the world. Owning a work of art is an invaluable experience, as you know. It adds inspiration and beauty to any home, and especially in a time like this when we are spending more time at home. It's important to surround yourself with what makes you feel happy. Art can uplift your mood, it works wonders for your mental health, and it can also boost your confidence. You can and should always feel proud of owning a beautiful work of art, to, of course, the envy of your friends. To celebrate our launch and your first art collection, we offer art installment payment plans, which means you can become the proud owner of a stunning piece of art with only £50 a month. So please have a look at our shop and scroll down for inspiration. We have such a wide collection of unique pieces waiting to find their perfect home. So if you find something you love, there is no time to waste. You may end up making one of the most meaningful investments of your life. So now I have the great honor to introduce you to our star of the night, Ted Harrison. Hi, Ted. Hi, Ted. Before you start sharing your wonderful artworks with us, would you please tell us a bit more about the amazing large-scale public art commission you have been contracted to create?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about that. I've been listening to Richard and yourself describing this fellow, and I no idea that it could possibly be me. The way in which I was being described, entirely flattering and unworthy. However, let me just start with a little bit about where I work, just in case there are some people who might be a bit baffled as to where these two places are. I'm going to share the screen now, if I can do the technology correctly, and if that's working, I don't know. Probably not. Let's see if I can. Are we seeing that on screen at the moment?
Not
No?
yet.
Right.
Yet.
Let me just have another go. What about that?
Not yet.
No.
Might take a few more.
We did, of course, experiment with all this in advance. Have you done your share bit at your end?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
There we go. There we go. That's fine. That's fine. Now. Great. Now, Unst is arrowed up at the top, and Ceredigion is marked there as well. So it's a long way apart. It takes well over 24 hours to go from one to the other. But they are two places on the edge that are really the two places I call home. During COVID, we've been in Wales because we haven't been able to travel. But usually we are spending time in both places. Here are just a few pictures of Unst. The ferry we have to arrive by. If we're there in winter, we have the Fire Festival, which is of a celebration of Viking heritage and just a nice seaside shot. Nobody in sight there at all. That can be a huge empty beach all to yourself. Now, public artworks. This is actually the upper room of a brewery in Unst, which is where I worked on a piece for St. Paul's Cathedral. And eventually we took it down from Unst down to London. And at eye line, it looks like poppies. It was for Remembrance Tide on a white disc. But go aloft from the Whispering Gallery, looking down, and the poppies make up images of 3 children who had been used by adults in wars. So the point of the picture was to draw attention to the exploitation of children in war. Then at Gloucester Cathedral, these are the famous cloisters there, which actually were used for filming Hogwarts at one stage. I had an exhibition which took current, or at least recent news stories and quotes from to illustrate the biblical story of the Passion. For instance, on one side, I had 30 pieces of silver, and those are silver coins from all the main oil-producing countries of the world. In the middle, a reference to that cry from the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And it's a familiar picture. Then on the right, it is finished, and that's a picture of a young man who was shot in ignominy during the First World War. Another piece which I'm very, very happy to have done was for Guy's Hospital. As many of you will know, I had a kidney transplant many years ago, and I discovered that the donor had, her relatives had planted a cherry tree in her honor. So when I was asked to create a work to honor all organ donors, I used that motif of the cherry tree. And then it was officially opened by Alan Titchmarsh to represent the cherry tree gardening horticultural side of things, and blessed by Rowan Williams. Another piece I did, which was for St. Thomas's Hospital, was taking the theme of the Nightingale, and this was also honoring those who were donors of organs. And the idea is that stars and leaves are added to that particular picture, which is a large work with initials on from time to time to celebrate individuals. And there's a piece from Church in Scotland up in Unst, a large wall sculpture. And one underway at the moment, this is what's being worked on at this current moment, which is for the Kite Centre in Tregaron. But it's also very much celebrating the revival, not just of the kite as a bird, but of the whole of Welsh culture over the 150 years since the days when this building was a school where the Welsh knot was practiced, where children who spoke Welsh were punished. This is in the National Library in Wales, and it's about the poet Hayth Wyn, who won the chair at the National Eisteddfod during the First World War, but was killed just before he could actually accept it. And this chair is now preserved in Hayth Wyn's old home. And I made a picture of it using images, collage of images from the First World War itself, and the grave of Hayth Wyn in the middle. Now, I think we have Ewan Gyle watching at the moment. This was a portrait, a great fun piece I did of him in his role as a pantomime dame in Aberystwyth. So the types of work I'm working on are not all serious and religious. But to get to the works that I'm showing at the moment today, the one I referred to with Richard is the Arctic terns, a large work showing the way in which the terns migrate around the world. This is Score Beach, and what is shown on that, it's a bird's eye view. I've used sand from the beach itself, I've used shells from the beach, and I've also included the old rickety bridge that you cross to get to it, and just a hint of the boathouse, the upturned boat that has been turned into a shed, which you find down by the beach. And there's the doll. What happened to her afterwards, I don't know, but I collected some sand from the beach and then painted this picture and placed the picture in the sand. This is again Shetland and Unst. It's in the style of the famous printmaker, Japanese printmaker, but I'm using the wave to show Muckleflugger, the most northern of the lighthouses, most northern point, in fact, in the whole of the United Kingdom. The sea is an amazing, stormy thing that one sees and experiences. And in the past, good heavens, if you were out in a ship, sailing ship, and the storm blew up and you had no warning, a terrifying experience. And this is a triptych of such an experience. And the gannet. Larger than life picture that I did, just of this majestic, beautiful bird against a blue background. And of course, the gannet is a Welsh bird, and the sea is along the coast of Wales as well that blows up storms. And this takes me back to 5,000 years ago in Wales, Pentre Ifan, one of the great standing stone monuments, not far from where they dug the stones for Stonehenge. And we went there not long ago, and I sketched it and then did a sketch in paint afterwards, which I hope got some of the atmosphere of it. Wales again, this was done for an exhibition of work by to do with the poetry of R.S. Thomas, who wrote disparagingly about the nuclear power station at Trethyneth, and he was very scarred by the idea of modernism coming into Wales. holy well. I did a number of holy wells in Wales. This was great fun. We went around quite a number of them, and we collected the water from the well. This is St. Non's well. So I used watercolors with some collage from a Welsh Bible to create these pictures, but the water from the well. So St. Non's well picture was painted with St. Non's well's water, and all the wells had their own water with them. An abstract, totally different. This is where ideas of contemporary art come in, total freedom. You can make of it what you want. It's made from felt. So it's, again, not using traditional material, but felt and into patterns, random patterns, which you can make, if you look at it, into patterns of things and shapes that you might want to see yourself. This is the Rouault picture, where I naughtily use the collage from Richard Dawkins' book to create it, and a close-up of it there. The knowledge of good and evil, a small painting that I did just to pose that question. What is the difference sometimes? Is it a matter of culture? Is it a matter of tradition? Is it a matter of law? How do we know? Is there an absolute good, an absolute evil? The R.S. Thomas, God is in the throat of a bird. This was an interesting piece because I had an old, totally battered prayer book that I'd inherited. No good as a prayer book, but it turned out it was well over 200 years old. This is from the reign of King George III. And in it, they still had prayers of thanksgiving for the deliverance of the king from the gunpowder plot and Guy Fawkes. So I thought, well, modern terrorist, put it on the paper, just shows how terrorism is not a thing that is just 21st century. Elvis, yes, fascinating study of Elvis and the messianic figure of Elvis, but celebrity does fade away in due course. This is my COVID picture, 19 figures. COVID-19, bleak. Everybody's keeping themselves to themselves. Desolate, nothing happening. Again, going back to Unst, there is a little wood. Shetland doesn't have trees, they say, but it does. This is a little wood called Halligarth, and I went there in the winter, and using a combination of techniques of acrylic paint and photographic techniques, I produced this image. Some abstracts. Sometimes I just let abstract, just get a piece of paper, collection almost of random colors, and see where it goes. And this is, I think, a form of meditation as well. And the Garden of Gethsemane, which was, this one is based on the first of the 15 images of the Stations of the Cross that I did for my MA piece. And that's one that I think just speaks for itself. It's the desolation that came at the end of Christ's ministry before the Passion and before Easter. So that's the quick run through the pictures. I'm now back out of my share. And really, I think as this is my very first Zoom exhibition, highly inexperienced at it, and not really as tech savvy as I think some people who will be watching will be, but I'm here really to field, as I was told by Laura, any questions that anybody might have about any of the pictures and about anything that I might want to mention. And I'm looking at some of the pictures of people on screen, including Johan on the top right of my screen at the moment. Hello, Johan.
Fantastic presentation, Ted. Thank you very much. Please use our chat box if you like to ask your questions to Ted, or you can put your hand up and we will unmute you to ask a question. Yeah, so please wave or use the chat box to ask your question. Okay, is anybody Yeah, we got a question. Oh, we got quite a few questions. Lovely. So I'm going to take the first question from Sue. Hi, Sue.
Hello. No, I've known Fred Ted, and I was just amazed at the variety of your work, Ted. Very touched by stuff.
Well, thank you. I did a portrait of Sue not long ago, which is now in the National Library. I just don't stick to one style. I remember once being told, "Oh, well, nobody will recognize what you do because it's everything is so different." But then, no, that's part of it. I'm sometimes criticized, for doing one thing and getting there, and then thinking, "No, I'm going to do something totally different," and carrying on with something totally different. No, I just love exploring new ways, new techniques, trying out new ideas of doing things. An idea comes along, and where the ideas come from, I don't know. But yes,
Nice.
a different technique.
I very much enjoyed all of them.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. We got a question from Teresa. Teresa, yes, you were waving earlier. Hi, Teresa.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Hello. Yes, I was just really interested in what you were saying before in your conversation about the shamanic role of the artist. And it just occurred to me actually that, it's all about energy transferring. And I remember once when I went into a church in Manchester called the Hidden Gem, and it has these amazing paintings by an artist called Norman Adams, and he had done the Stations of the Cross, which you were talking about as well. And when I came in, I was just a normal person, but when I came out, I was in little pieces because of these paintings. And this religious art I thought was immensely powerful. And I really feel that, religion isn't explored anymore at art school. And it wasn't when I was there either. But the artist Norman Adams was working quite high up level in the universities up until the 1980s. And then I think he must have retired and he's now died. But so at that time, it was still something people were talking about, and now it's not anymore. And I wondered I don't know why that is either, but I just thought I'd mention it. And I really admire what you're doing with your religious work. I think it's incredible.
There was a book published about 20 years ago, or 20 years ago, by an American academic, which, if I remember the title correctly, was The Strange Case of Religious Art and Religion and Contemporary Art. And he started out by saying, if you go into any modern gallery, if you go into any of these great temples, if you like, of modern art, Tate Modern and so on, what you will notice is there is no specifically religious art at all, even though, and when I was doing the MA, there were several people who wanted to get into exploring spiritual ideas through art, and they all dropped out. They never completed the course. They found this, I suppose it's philosophical battering of French philosophers and neo-Marxist theorists and so on that was talking about art, and the youngsters knew nothing else, and so they came up with all the usual identicate cliched gender-related, identity-related art, which it's all the same. And I was trying to do something different. But I think it's true, looking at it from the church point of view, you do go into a building which is beautiful, a church building with great art. You are not then obliged to go in and say, yes, I do believe, I will write, sign on the dotted line of faith, get myself baptized or whatever, come along and be a regular member. You go there and you're able to absorb the divine without going through the authority and the ritual of it all. But there are still some artists who are doing some amazing work in places. If you ever get to Salisbury Cathedral, Salisbury Cathedral has a new font by a man called William Pye. Look it up online. It's the most glorious thing, and it's just made out of flowing water. A font made out of flowing water, which means a great deal more than all the doctrines and catechisms of baptism.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for your question. Shall we take a few more questions from our public? Anybody who's got any questions for Ted? If not, I'm going to ask my question. Do you believe, Ted, that art can replace religion?
I don't think it will replace religion, because religion and art are on the same continuum. They are two of a kind, if you like. I think within everybody, at some stage or another, they have to face the ultimate questions. Where do I come from? Where am I going? What happens when I die? Why might I be ill? Why do I fall in love? Why do I love? Why do I hate? All of these questions, everybody, you can't avoid them just being human. And you can't also answer them satisfactorily within the confines of human discourse and discussion. You've got to go outside that. Now, if you go outside it to a set of dogma, you might find answers. You might be one of those people who likes to have a rule book. On the other hand, if you're not, you go outside it and you bring in all those influences of the divine which are not written down, which don't have their own rituals, but can be discovered through the catalyst of art. So I would say, there are two things doing very much the same job, but some people find one, some people find the other as a better way of getting some of the answers or hinting at some of the answers.
Lovely. We got a question from Gwenda for you, Ted. Do you ever listen to religious music while you create art?
No. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't tend to listen to religious music when I'm creating art. No, art, the ideas come to me in the most unlikely places. I went out for a short walk this afternoon and got an idea, which I will be working on. Haven't told Helen, my wife, yet, but it's a big scale thing. I find, lying in the bath is a very good way of getting ideas. Just in bed at night, just thinking, because I can draw pictures in my head, so I can get ideas going that way. But no, I don't listen to music. No.
Lovely. We got a question from Wendy. Yes. Hi, Wendy.
And actually, it'll come from John, who's with her. Ted, really good to see you again, and thank you so much for that burgeoning of creativity, which I've just been delighted to see. I'm absolutely in agreement with you that words really do run out of puff. They kind of crumble away in telling the divine, because it's always the God beyond God, so the God is always a kind of idol, really. So you go beyond and you either fall into silence, I think, or on the other hand, at certain types of art or of artistic expression, and that's what you're doing. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how for you art can be a way of prayer, a form of reflection, a form of meditation, a form of contemplation, whatever it is. Could you just intimated that in your conversation with Richard? Could you say a bit more about it?
Well, lovely to see you, Wendy. I'm glad I wasn't getting an Episcopal reprimand for heresy or anything on that particular occasion. It's difficult to explain. Because I don't know really how to define what prayer is. That's the first problem. But yes, I find that my mind, in a sense, empties when I'm at work on something. And time vanishes. If I'm there and I'm working and I'm really absorbed, time, I lose track of time. I must admit, get a bit sort of irritable if I'm snapped out of it to go and do something domestic, which no, I know I should. I'm not sure I've got the words for it. I just hope that what I'm making, I'm producing, says it. It is. I work without music. I sometimes will scribble on ideas, and certainly will write when there's activity behind me. But when I'm actually painting and doing something, I just will be by myself and will work on it. And when I'm working on an abstract, where I actually no idea where it's going to lead me, maybe that's got some big parallels with prayer as well, in that it's not a matter of just saying, please God, I want X, Y, and Z. It's just a matter of opening up and seeing what's going to come in from the divine. When I did the MA work, I thought it was important not just to do it, this version of the Stations of the Cross, which were 15 pictures ending with the resurrection, but I also fitted them together in a different way to make a comment about the ongoing forces of creation. So I was looking at how God created a world in which suffering was inevitable. It was very important to do that in the right place. And I was very fortunate of being able to ask the church where I was living then at Acres in Kent, a medieval church I'd known as a child, whether I could use the space. And so I had 40 days run of an empty space that I only had to clear up every now and again for Sunday services and the occasional funeral. And what was very telling was that part of the floor that I was using to lay things out was also the grave of 6 children. Now, the reflection that comes through that, something must have come through all of that, but I'm not going to put it into words. I just hope that it came through in the work itself.
Ted, thank you. I'm sure that idea of prayer essentially as emptying, in order, I would say, to let God shine through, and prayer is actually getting out of the way. So that's a form of emptying. So Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, John, for your question. We got another question, 2 more questions. One from Lulu. I've noticed that some of your words combine words with images. Do you have any idea of words with images like Magritte, this is not a pipe, also about for cold?
I've done a version actually of the Magritte picture. Because I like that conundrum. Yes, words, I do have wordplay in pictures from time to time, because, words can be used as a form of art, poetry, for instance, as long as one's not thinking the words have to therefore mean exactly what they say, or that you're using them to play with, or in the case of the Dawkins collage, I use them entirely for mischievous purposes. It's important that they are words, and I actually chose which words I was going to use. And in the collage, where I used a passage from the Welsh Bible in the Wells, I chose something that was appropriate to that particular saint. So yes, words do help, but what I'm trying to get away from is total dependence on the absolute sort of almost legalistic meaning of the words. Words are of help, poetry is of help, quotes are of help, collages of help, but not to be taken legalistically, absolutely, and literally.
Thank you very much, Ted, for your beautiful insight. We got another question from Javier. Javier, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hi. So Ted, maybe it's more for me to figure out a better way to understand your art, but do you consider that you are let's say, Christian artist who actually actively seeks to be spiritual and transcendental to the believer community? Or is the I don't want to use the word mythology, but the framework of Christianity, the kind of the theory that you base your work on, just because you're just fascinated by it? And the reason I'm asking this question is that when I was doing my MA last year in contemporary art, I wrote an essay about an artist called Hermann Nietzsche, and he's from Vienna. And he is funny because he was actively seeking to offend Christians, and he was a very active atheist, and he did this set of performances called the Theater of Orgies and Mysteries, where he basically directed a crowd to perform sort of dances and rituals with animal blood and sort of mocking the Christian rites. And he was baffled to learn that a lot of art critics from the Vatican and from the Catholic Church found his work super inspirational, and that he had gone so far into criticizing Christianity that he had actually sort of got in sync with the same spiritual ideas. He was just using a different medium, so to say, to tackle them. So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. Well, the first observation is, of course, it's very dangerous to get too anti-Christianity, because as St. Paul discovered, something suddenly might click and you get a conversion experience, particularly if you go too heavily into the mocking and the hatred and so on. But I think that my background is, because I happen to be British, I happen to have had a father who was a vicar and things like this, I'm steeped in the Anglican tradition. So this is where I come from, and that's what I'm familiar with. That's the structure I'm familiar with. But I don't necessarily buy into all the package and everything that goes with it. And when I was wanting to explore ideas, and I really don't know what I'm exploring in a sense, but I know that art is one way to discover some of the mysteries that we have to face up as human beings. Life is a journey, but it's also a huge puzzle and a mystery as to what it's about. As I said, when you get older, these questions do get into focus a little bit more. And using my background, but also using the interest or the way in which I know that it's the spiritual is a valid possibility. The divine is not something necessarily that you believe in. You don't believe in God, you experience. And you experience something and then maybe find that the label God is what is attached to it. Because I'm sure there will be many people who will have not had any form of religious background, who will still have all these questions, still have all these experiences of awe and wonder and love and all the rest of it, that are the attributes of the divine. It's a muddled answer. I'm sorry, Javier. I'm just a mere humble artist. I'm slaving away with paint. There have been greater minds from St. Augustine onwards who have tackled all of these things. And if I can perhaps just give through a bit of art the possibility of somebody coming up with their own answer or triggering something in them, then that's possibly the job is done.
Thank you very much, Javier, for your question. For everyone else, please use the hand emoticon to ask your question. It would be easier than waving at the camera, or use the chat box for your to write your question. Okay, we got a really nice, interesting question from Adelisa. I wonder if your work changed when you had a transplant.
Well, that was now over 30 years ago. So I've had almost half my life now, in which I've been enormously grateful to the medical profession and also to the family of a donor, a kidney donor. No, I don't know whether it did change. What I think it did do, which is very important, is that it made me think that I can't let the rest of my life be wasted. No, I've got to do something with it. I can't just, sit back and enjoy and have a nice, easy time. There's something that makes me think, no, I've got to contribute. And art is one way perhaps I can do it. I've got to keep thinking. I've got to be doing things. I can't sit back and just let life go by. It's a form of gratitude, really, the work that I keep doing, and gratitude to the people who've made this extension to my life possible. I wasn't expecting to be here 30 years ago, 35 years ago.
Wonderful. Wow, you are such an inspiration, Ted. We got another question from Emily. Can you please talk about God creating a world where suffering is inevitable?
I should ask John, who asked me the question earlier, to go into that one. The work that I did, because this is the question that is almost impossible to answer. If somebody says to you, well, you believe in a God of love, and look at all the suffering around, why did he let it happen? Now, we've got lots of different stories to do with, original sin. We've got stories to do with the way in which people have got freedom of choice and so on. But it never really gets to the bottom of it. What I tried to do in the work was take the Stations of the Cross, which was the story essentially of God suffering, going through the suffering and going through the despair from the Garden of Gethsemane all the way through to the cross, and taking all the suffering. But at the same time, looking at that whole question of creation, which is not a once only thing, it's an ongoing thing. There's creation happening all the time. It's out, it's happening in the treetops outside my window at the moment, with little birds coming through, fledging for this time, at this time of year. There's always creation on the go. There's erosion, there's building up, there's silt, there's rock falls. All the time, creation is going on, even in the form of new forms of COVID, evolving as well. So we've got this ongoing story of creation. So I did 15 individual. I took the 15 individual pictures of the Stations of the Cross and put them together in a different way. And having planned it as such, I then had a whole picture of illustrating the forces of creation. I had the sun and I had the moon at the two extremes. The moon, the dark shape, had been the empty tomb at one stage, and the sun was the resurrection. And then I had various bits of detritus that I'd seen on the beach at Skor, the body of a seabird that had been opened up by a predator, was lying on the beach. That came into the big picture, but turned around. It turned into the scourge on the back of Christ at the time of the beating. So that was the way I tried to do it, just by taking the two sides and knitting them together. I can't answer the question, but that was one way of trying to ask it.
Thank you very much, Ted, for your answer. We got another question from Walid. Good evening, Laura, Ted, and everyone. I would like to know how much of your artwork is personal or religious. Are they intertwined? Also, is each piece a doorway to the next?
They're not all religious. The image of Johan as the pantomime Dame, I don't think had any particular religious significance. It was a great fun piece to do. Some of the portraits I've been doing are not religious, and some of the natural world pictures, I suppose you could say, have religion in them. The picture of the Arctic terns is a way of looking at the wonders of the world, the awesomeness of the world. And the gannet, such a graceful bird, and so on. So there's that side of it. But where I'm actually posing theological questions, no, that's not every picture at all. Sometimes I'm just scribbling doodles, just for my own sake. But what I do want to try and do when I'm being serious is develop what I've called a visual theology, which is just to see how one can use the visual arts to ask some of the questions that theologians have wondered and asked of themselves. But where I think the visual arts has the advantage is that you can't argue with a picture. You know, you can say, I don't like it. I'm not going to look at it. But you can't say it is wrong because it has no words, and therefore you can't apply the logic of language to it. Yes, it's just a way of being able to ask theological questions, but in a totally different medium, but every now and again, doing something utterly different as well.
We are going to take one more question from our audience. Anybody? Please use the emoticon to raise your hand. If you got one, it would be easier for me to see you. Or you can use the chat box if you're shy. Okay, no more questions.
I think everybody's probably had enough of me.
Right, so we are getting to the end of our event for today. If you enjoy our event and you would like to keep in touch with us, then please subscribe to our mailing list. The link is in the chat box. We are offering only for today, so this is just for you, 10% off from any of Ted's artwork. So if you are interested to make one of the best deals of your life, please follow our link, which again can be found in the chat box. I'm going to give you a minute or so for you to click on and take advantage of the offer. Thank you so much, Ted, for reminding us of what's possible. It is invigorating to see you dedicating your life to what brings you joy by pursuing this passion despite the risk and fears. You really inspire us to do the same.
Well, thank you very much for hosting the event. It's very, very kind of you, and it's wonderful seeing names of friends as well as other names I don't know who've joined in. Yeah, it's lovely to think that yes, that you've felt that you could join in and hear a bit more of me droning on. But thank you very much indeed for coming along, and thank you, Laura, for hosting it all.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you, Ted, for the wonderful presentation of your artwork. I would also like to thank our volunteer, Javier, who made sure that our event ran as safe as possible and that no unwanted guests join in. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, for showing support, for appreciating art, and for taking time to get to know us a bit better. So I'm going to give you one more minute for you to click on the links provided. And if you got any questions between now and then, please use the chat box. Okay, lovely. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the event and for showing support to Ted. Good night.
Night.